Hello to all you Trekyardians out there joining us again for today's episode. I am Captain Foley.
And I am Commander Cockings. Welcome back, everyone. So great to see all of your smiling faces yet again. Or not, because all I see is the Captain, myself, and a script.
Well, I'm not sure that they're all smiling, Samuel. Some of them may in fact be scowling. But anyway, let's start today's episode and endeavor to put a smile on everyone's faces. Let's turn those frowns upside down by discussing a ship we have already done an episode on, actually.
Yes, that's right, everyone. Today's episode is on the Enterprise J that we saw very little of in actual canon. Now, the previous episode we did on the ship included a lot of fan-contributed content and facts that were not really canon.
So, today we will be taking a look at her in all of her official canon glory, giving you all of the facts that are considered canon, as well as having the man who designed her, Mr. Doug Drexler, joining us to discuss some details of the design and his process.
And in the last episode, we relied entirely on pictures that we found on the internet, including screenshots and a fan-made model and such. But for today's episode, we'll be using the original Enterprise J model that Doug Drexler made back for Enterprise. So it's as canon as you can get, guys. And just as we did for Trekyards now, as opposed to 2 years ago, when the original special was made, everything will be correct. All the details, studio assets, and even high quality renders, a true remaster, and there's a lot of great questions that have been added in the script to really get new details on the ship. So it's going to be a fun one, guys.
That's right. And like we said, we will bring in Doug later to discuss those details and maybe get some more insights into this future Enterprise design, as well as walk us through some of the designing process. So let's start off by saying that the Enterprise J was seen in an episode of Enterprise entitled Azadi Prime.
And when we say appeared, all that was seen was a corridor, backlit display, and exterior hull detail, and we actually have access to that hull segment. So here it is, re-rendered. This is all you got to see in 2004. There it is, re-rendered.
It's a beautiful thing. How cool is it that we can actually re-render that for you all? Wow. But anyway, the Enterprise J was a 26th century Federation starship operated by Starfleet in a possible future timeline shown to Archer by Daniels, in which the Sphere Builders fought the Federation.
According to Memory Alpha, it was classified as Enterprise J type, although that was never said on screen. But in our previous episode, some side canon, and Doug Drexler himself liked the name Universe class as its designation. But as we stated in this one, we'll give it more to the actual canon information, which states the ship participated in the historic battle of Procyon 5, which the forces of the Federation successfully drove the Sphere Builders back into the transdimensional realm.
Although, the fact that Captain Archer and the crew of the Enterprise, along with the Xindi, actually disabled the spheres in the Expanse and stopped the Xindi's attack on Earth, it should be noted that the timeline in which this ship was ultimately built may in fact never happen, and thus the ship may never have existed at all, or ever will. The battle in which we see the Enterprise J actually takes place in the transdimensional disturbance that was created by the spheres in the Delphic Expanse. This temporal disturbance aside, the J may have been built regardless and just never fought in that battle, in the new timeline created with the destruction of the spheres.
And it is worth mentioning that in Star Trek Online's Agents of Yesterday, we do see the Battle of Procyon 5, and it's quite a convoluted thing. We're not going to get into it here because Stowe is not canon, while License is not actually canon, but we might do an episode on the whole Battle of Procyon 5 at another date, because we've got some fun stuff to talk about for that. But yes, as proof to help Archer convince the Xindi of this alternate future, Daniels gives Archer an initiation medal that actually belonged to a Xindi crew member serving aboard the Enterprise J, showing that Xindi and humans eventually worked together, and there are in fact a few Xindi serving, not only in Starfleet, but actually on this future version of a ship called Enterprise.
Okay, so let's bring in Doug Drexler now to discuss some things. Welcome back to Trekyards, Doug.
Hey, everybody.
So, let's talk about the J now. Is it true that the writing staff was actually very pressed for time, so there wasn't a lot of deliberation over the naming of this vessel? I know Manny Koto was quoted as saying, "We were just sitting around the room and said, what should it be? The J? Okay." Is this exactly what happened? And were you part of that meeting, Doug? Tell us how you first heard about calling it the Enterprise J.
I had nothing to do with choosing what letter it was, and I don't know if it was even the kind of thing that they would, sometimes they will send tech notes to the art department, to Mike, and, he'll bounce it off of us, but something like that. I doubt that they asked Mike. No one asked me about it, I know that when I first started working on it, it was originally the K. It was the Enterprise K. And it switched to J sometime down the line. My files, if I look at my files, there's still folders that say Enterprise K on it.
So originally there was a scene actually showing the exterior of the J in all of its glory in the middle of this historic battle, but sadly this was dropped for financial reasons, and we can assume time constraints as well. So we don't actually see this ship except for a display on one of the monitors in the corridor in which Daniels and Archer are talking. So it talks about this potential scene and how the J was originally meant to be shown beyond what we've already talked about.
You know, I mean, if there was a scene described in the script, I can't remember it. I mean, it's been a few years since I've even looked at the original script. You know, I mean, how many years ago was that? I don't recall. I really don't. I don't think that it was ever anything extensive. You know, it may have been a flyby or something, I guess, but, you know.
As a result of the shot being dropped, we only see a small interior view of a hallway aboard the J and a window looking out on the battle. So can you tell us, Doug, did you have any input into the design of that interior space at all? You know, creating the 26th century Federation corridor and L-cars displays?
Look, stuff has to get done real quick, and I had my thing, which was, you know, just getting out 4 designs of the ship or whatever I could before Herman's meeting. My opinion on the corridor, I never liked it. You know, it doesn't suggest, you know, this, you know, a leap in aesthetics or technology or anything. You know, I'm sure that if Mike and Jim Vanover, you know, were doing the Enterprise J as a you know, weekly series, and it was a hero ship, those guys probably would have spent, you know, a month designing the interface, if not more. But it's something that it's an interface of the week, you know, and I'm sure that, you know, Mike's order to Jim Vanover probably was, I want something that still looks Starfleet, but it has to be different enough to let us know that we're someplace else. I mean, I'm sure that's exactly what he said, you know. So, I mean, it works perfectly fine for what it is.
It's also stated on Memory Alpha this ship was in fact armed with futuristic particle beam weapons. Was there any other details or things that the script called for?
Beams. Those are love beams. They're not weapons. If they hit
that helped you
they don't
in
blow
designing
you up,
her,
they
Doug.
don't kill you. They make you very happy and peaceful.
And let's please speculate a little for our viewers, Doug. Just how powerful can you see the Enterprise J being? We saw the leap from the NX-01 technology to TOS tech was huge, as the Defiant matched every ship in the NX-01 era with total ease. If this 100-year gap was that drastic, how much more powerful in terms of offensive and defensive potential do you think the Enterprise J is, since it's from 2550s, compared to the last we saw of Prime Trek in Nemesis, taking place in 2379? It's 171 years and 5 Enterprise iterations. So what are your thoughts on the offensive and defensive improvements for the J?
See, my idea with the Enterprise J is that they're so much further advanced than we are in Enterprise or even TNG that if it was up to me, weapons and things like that would be almost unrecognizable. They'd have changed so much. I mean, look, it's not just a matter of years and one single race developing stuff over 200 years. You're talking about a space-faring civilization that is going out into the universe and meeting hundreds of different races, some more advanced. You know, I really... to speculate on what the weapons might be, you know, the fact that nothing comes off the top of my head means that I want something so different, so unusual, you know, and it's not, I don't know what that might be. I hate to even think that they still have battles. That really bothers me, you know, that we met them for the first time in the middle of a war. You know, I mean, I love action and combat shows and stuff like that, but I just like to see things getting better, you know, and so I really resist, you know, the idea of it being some kind of super battle wagon or something like that. I prefer to think that they don't even have to fight, you know. It's a diplomacy beam. You know, it's just a good old friendly diplomacy beam
called the Picard particle beam.
You know, I mean, they can't help it.
Everyone sits around a campfire and has marshmallows. It's just it's a great experience for everyone. But let's I want to picture very out defensive though, Doug. I mean, obviously weapons aside, just a ship this big, this advanced. I mean, what can it do in terms of defense? Can it now, you know, fly and surf a star? Can it go next to a black hole and be fine? I've always felt that, you know, the ship can travel transdimensional and travel through time, transtemporal, you know. So it's like with abilities like those, no one can even hit you with anything, you know. It's impossible. You can't possibly be hurt. but do you think it could survive the power of a sun or even the power of a black hole and get... I mean, are those no longer an obstacle for this sort of ship?
Okay, all right. Is it in the story? Do they need it in the script?
We'll write it.
In the script, the ship does it.
Okay.
And that's the way it's always been. You know, we find a way to make it possible for the ship.
All right, so let's go back to the actual 3D model that you had built. First, talk us through when and why you built this 3D model, turning your concept into a full reality.
Well, you know, when Herman comes in and asks for something like that, especially when you know it's going to be 200 years in the future, it's kind of a tall order to, in a matter of seconds, design something that is going to be dramatically different, yet be recognizable as an Enterprise. I actually had someone online say, you know, by then they wouldn't have to even have a saucer nacelles. It could be something else. Yeah, but then you're defeating. It has to be. You got to look at it and know. I mean, that's why there's a. And it even has to tie to the NX. I mean, that's why there's a deflector on the front. You know, I mean, this is the way it goes. Herman sticks his head in, you know, and says, "Oh, Dougie, oh pal, oh buddy, oh chum." That's exactly what he would say. And he would, you know, give me the brief on it. I'd read the script, you know, and he'd say, "What's today? Tuesday? I have a meeting with Mr. Berman Thursday morning." Okay. He doesn't tell me how many he wants. He knows that I've been around long enough to know that you don't send over one or even two things, because you have to give them things to hate. You have to, now, on the other hand, though, I have to say that we're always cognizant of the fact that if we send over some stuff that we hate for them to throw away, they might like it. And you'll end up with something you hate. And it's happened, you know. The first thing that I do is I go back and I look at some of the stuff that we've worked on in the past that didn't get used, of course, because there's almost no time. You know, and so I used some stuff that, you know, like the Altair class that was in the Ships of the Line calendar, was actually a design that Mike and I came up with for Voyager. It was originally for Voyager. I'm sure that it would probably, I'm sure it wasn't even considered because the studio doesn't want to lose the saucer nacelle configuration, you know. That's part of the reason why on Enterprise, when we talked about a dataless class, was that it doesn't have a saucer. You know, so that was a problem. They wanted to be recognizably a Starfleet vessel. I understand that, you know. But yeah, so I did 3, maybe 4 designs, and the beauty of it was at that point, and we were really far ahead of the curve on Enterprise in that we had computers that could do CG in the art department, which before that, we never had that before. We were able to build the thing in the art department and do a couple of flybys. And Herman could walk over there with a VHS and slap it into the player and play it and look really cool. Look what I got. You know, we did this in the art department, you know. But that's how it goes. They picked one right away. I wasn't put through the ringer.
Now, I remember in the last episode we spoke about how you had a sort of combo, the Altair with then the Saucer, which was a separate class. Was that one of the 4 you submitted, or was that... I can't remember in the story, did they then ask you to remove that and just make it the flat J that we know, or was that a separate iteration?
Oh, that was a separate iteration. Okay. That was a separate iteration. And, you know, I've used that one in the background on the Ships of the Line books and stuff like that here and there. Yeah. And to me, I really like the way that thing looks. It has a very hefty presence like the D did when I first saw it. You know, it just seems like a freaking ocean liner, big fat ship, you know. And I'm sorry they didn't go for that one, you know. But I know the reason why they picked the one that they went with, and that's because they want to have something that they want more of a direct line from the NX, because we're doing the show that features the NX. We're not, if we were on TNG, it probably would have had a secondary hull. But the fact that we were on the NX, we kept that kind of flat design. You know, that was a saucer and nacelles, and that's it. So that, you know, when people see it, there's this direct connection.
So just how much detail was in that first model, and how did you represent this 2-mile-long craft? I know people are often confused by the size and think that those windows are actual individual windows, but that's not the case at all. So talk us through imparting a sense of scale to those windows.
There's very little geometric detail on the model. It's almost none. It's almost all maps, because it didn't need to be more than that. You know, I mean...
Well, you never see it.
Well, it's just that even if we were going to see it, I wouldn't lavish that much time on it, because I'm going to hand it over to Eden Effects. I'll hand the design over to them, and they'll build. But one was never built any more detailed than the one that I had, because as a matter of fact, the image on the viewing screen was rendered by me in the art department. I just handed it to Jim Vanover, and he plugged it in. I don't think that Eden didn't have anything to do with it on the screen. But ordinarily, I would never. I mean, like for instance, when I did the model for the NX in the art department, that had every detail on it. That's in the final. I sweated through every corner of that ship because that's the hero ship. We want to make sure that everything, right down to the reaction control thrusters, have super detail. But
what do you think when people say each of those windows are actually a single window?
I say good. The whole idea of the ship is to be disorienting, and for you not to really know.
Why are all the windows on the ceiling if it's on the top of the hull?
Okay, well, look, it's like I said. You got to think these things out. Use your imagination. Say, let's assume that they thought about this when they designed the ship. What could
Which they had to.
Which they'd have to. And the art department, too, had to think about it, Since we have to start from the point of view that this is real, we see it on the screen, it's designed. So what does that mean? Okay, well, either the floor is glass, or the floor and the ceiling are glass. So you got a couple of decks in there. But the way I always saw it, here's another way of looking at it, though. Just because our ships tend to fly like this on a galactic plane, and this is up and this is down, doesn't mean we have to do that in the ship. They've got artificial gravity on board the ship, and so why couldn't we have decks where their feet are pointed towards the center of the saucer? And now those are not floor and ceiling anymore, they're walls. Huge walls, a big gallery with different levels that you could walk around, and it could be really I'd love to design. I wish I had a reason to come up with some of the designs on the ship, because I think that everything has to be so dramatically different, but still make you think of, still plainly Star Trek, like Gene Roddenberry used to say, a very different but still recognizable USS Enterprise.
And I think you mentioned also that each of those lights are in fact of a skyscraper, just because of the scale of the ship. They're all huge towering things. It's not one individual window. It's like seeing a cityscape, but from far enough away, the lights obviously morph into bigger fields. Yeah. So it's just huge. It's a ship you can barely think of the scale. We'll talk about scale a little bit later in the program. So one thing that most people point out about that ship is in fact the struts are so spindly and the engine's so small. While this may be true in proportion to the ship, people never think about the ship in scale. The thinnest points of the struts are actually as large as the Enterprise E's nacelles, and the connection point to the main hull is about 20% larger than the Enterprise B's saucer. The nacelles themselves, well, they are about twice the length of the Enterprise E, and the warp coil elements are about the scale of the Enterprise D in length, and several decks thick, so not small by any means. Talk us through this relatively spindliness and the fan reaction to this and just that whole issue, Doug.
Well, the thing was that when I thought about doing a design that would seem futuristic to people who've been watching the show for years, looking at stuff that was futuristic, how do you make it extra futuristic? One of the things that about the original series Enterprise, as designed by Matt Jeffries, is the struts are so freaking spindly. As a matter of fact, I'm absolutely amazed at the construction of them building that thing back. It really is a work of amazing engineering that he built that. Dayton built that thing, and those nacelles stayed true for how many years? That's really amazing. When people build their AMT kits or Polar Lights kits or stuff like that, those nacelles on the kits are sagging in a year. So it really was remarkable. But that's part of that is what made, and actually, I've gotten in conversations. When we used to run the Federation Trading Post, we had pictures of the Enterprise on the wall, and I would get people bringing their kids to the store, and they would get into conversation with me about how absurd the design was of the Enterprise. And the first thing they would point to is the spindliness of the nacelles. they would say that's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, first of all, if there was thrust there, I mean, it would never, and I would have to explain that there is no thrust, it's a generator that generates a warp field. But is that, but to me, when I saw that, because I have imagination, people who don't have imagination look and go, that's impossible. I have to, sorry to say, any of you people out there who've, been saying the strut's ridiculous, you're not using your brains, okay? Sorry. How many hundreds of years are we in the future? Look at the technology that they have. We know that on a Starfleet vessel, it really is your structural integrity fields and your advanced construction techniques. I mean, first of all, the bridge is sitting right on top of the saucer, People say, well, why is that? That's kind of ridiculous. Wouldn't they put it inside? I go, no. Anyone who could hurt them with the bridge on top of the saucer, they'd slice right through the hull. You'd be finished anyway,
Mm-hmm.
It all has to do with defensive screens and stuff like that. I mean, as far as construction techniques, I've always been riled at whenever I see people, welding. You see welding torches and sparks and shit on a starship. To me, that's absurd. That's like stone knives and bearskins. They're not going to be building their ships that way. They're going to be growing their ships probably and printing them. And you won't have the kind of a truss and girder construction techniques that we see today, like on on the Brooklyn Bridge. I mean, it's like it's not going to be that way. I mean, structurally, those struts are stronger than anyone in. I was going to say stronger than anything that Picard knows, and they are. But ultimately, the construction techniques on the Enterprise D, in my mind, still would not be truss and girders. Right now we're printing stuff out. They're going to be printing cars soon. Yeah. They'll even be growing things. Instead of trusses and girders, they'll grow fractal elements that will be so incredibly strong. It'll be 1,000 times stronger than what we're used to, and incredibly light.
When we first talked to you, when we all started this Trekyards thing, obviously you told us in the video it was 2 miles long, and now with the real model and all the real models, people never think of it in context. The size of Enterprise D nacelles, they're not small nacelles, and think about those in real life terms. That's huge, and the connection point's bigger than an Enterprise B saucer. That's not small. And like you say, its technology's ever evolving, so why not get thinner and thinner? It's still huge. So yeah, it confused me, and hopefully this video will help convince people, because they're still huge.
Some people 500 years in the future. Some people will never be convinced, because it's more fun to whine.
Well, speaking about the engine specifically, can you talk us through your take on the 26th century warp nacelle and how it would look? Large orange Bizarre collectors, warp coils, which are separate elements sticking out of the front of the engine as a totally standalone element. It's very unique, and I would say a futuristic design for sure. So what are the functional reasons for some of this, do you think?
Well, I mean, it really came first from what's going to appear to be beyond what we've seen before. And if you look at design in real life, you'll see that things become simpler and simpler and simpler. And then pretty soon you have a phone that, to somebody from 1966, they'd be like, how do you make this work? There's no buttons, there's no cover, there's no nothing. So what happens, you remove all the extraneous stuff right down to just the stuff that are the touchstones of what a warp nacelle is: a Bussard collector, a warp coil. That's about it. Almost everything else has been simplified down to non-existence, So to me, that says, well, they're quite a bit beyond what we know already. They don't have these big warp core housings and stuff like that. The ship, I don't even know that they're using warp drive at that point.
But Doug, one thing about simplicity, it's not simplicity for simplicity's sake. It's form follows function. So you're saying it's losing all this extraneous stuff, but you're still implying that having that nacelle or the warp coil be so separate, it's not a design, it's a functional thing. So why have that much space? Why be that separate? I mean, is it for heat loss? Is it an enhanced warp? Is it going fast? I mean, what do you think would be the practical form follows function reason?
I mean, that's a tough question for me right now because I've never spent much time thinking about it. You know, it was
That's
mostly
why we're
about
here, Doug.
keeping it in line with the tech that we know and are familiar with, and visually say what the writers are trying to communicate. You know, the producers are trying to communicate that it's a futuristic design. Why it would be losing all of that stuff? I
Or just why that
suppose
much
that, like
excess
most
space?
things, if what's that?
Or just why that much excess space? Because it's so out.
What do you mean by excess space?
Well, I mean, it's a thing. There's just room around it. It's free flowing, almost free floating. That's
Yeah,
the
well, that
reason for
space
it.
belongs to space. It doesn't belong to the ship. You know, I mean, it's like you end up getting rid of the things you no longer need. You know, on something. It just
Why would you not
have
combine that? But why is there the space? Why wouldn't you have that connected to the top part of the engine? As I'm asking, like, why have it its separate piece? Why not have it all as part of a thin nacelle, all connected?
I can't give you a scientific reason for it. I can only give you an aesthetic reason for it.
Okay.
You know, it looked cooler. Believe me, I tried all of those things. That little piece of warp coil, I pushed it up, I stretched it, I shortened it, I looked at it from every end. It seemed most interesting, free floating like that. You know.
Oh, for sure. Yeah,
I mean, it's still well, and then the other thing that I always remembered when I first started watching TNG, one of the things that I loved about the D was when you got far enough away from it, all you saw was the plasma spill and the Bussard collector. Mm-hmm. It had reduced visually to just those things. And if you had told me there was nothing else, I would have believed it. I always thought that was extremely cool. So that had a certain influence on me as well. That when you got far enough back from the Enterprise D, that's all you saw. So when I did the J, it wasn't only the only thing you saw, but it was the only thing that was really there, you know?
But speaking about engines, let's talk impulse. There appears to be a single impulse drive at the back of the ship, and glowing blue strips along the nacelle struts up the engines, many small ones on the back of the struts, and one long line on the front. Are these also impulse engines, or is the ship given thrust by that single drive? A drive that is in fact about the size of a Constitution-class saucer.
The reason there is a recognizable impulse engine on the ship is because it's one of the touchstones of Starfleet vessels. Mm-hmm. It's important to see that. But by then, I would imagine that every part of all the surface area of the ship is able to repel against reality, or whatever you want to call it. There's magnetic fields in space. It can push against existence from any point on the ship for reasons we don't even know about yet. But my thing with the J was always, whatever you think it is, then it probably ain't. It has to be dramatically different, you know. It has to be. Otherwise, it's just another, Star Trek tends to get into a rut once Gene died, because no one wanted to change anything. It all became frozen in place. Even 100 years would go by, and it's almost still the same basic everything, That's kind of a shame. With the J, it was like I was saying, I would love to have a good reason to work on and design the interiors, because the challenge is to keep it Starfleet, but still so remarkably different. I mean, everybody's quarters is a holosuite, dude. You could live on the beach anywhere you want. You could change them from week to week. No one even really has to go to the bridge. You just stay in your quarters like a potato. Let's say we go to the bridge because it's an important social thing for us to all sit together. And you could go in there and say, you know what, today we're going to fly the ship from the original series bridge.
That's the dream.
And you can just change it. They put sailors on, square riggers and, sailing ships and stuff. Guys who are going to be on aircraft carriers, So maybe sometimes the ship is the original series ship, its control surfaces and stuff like that.
But I gotta pull you back to one of the things I mentioned in the question. What are those blue glowing elements on the struts. That single line on the back or front, and then many multiple on the back.
Yeah, I mean those are exhausts and intakes. I mean basically it's sort of what we saw on the motion picture ship, only we have a cool neon strip in the back and the front. I mean the Enterprise.
Professional lighting package.
Yeah, it's like it's like a lowrider, with the neon around the bottom.
Somebody on the bridge has a remote; they can change the colors to whatever they want.
Sure.
I like that. That's good. And that is it for this week's Trekyards. Wow.
Trekyards, wow! Is that like a new show?
It could be. If you like that idea, then do click into next week and see if it becomes a show name. It won't. But
anyway, the point is, tune in next week. You'll see the rest.
Part 2. Bye, guys.